IBM Linux One is the open source platform you need to rise above the competition faster than you ever imagined. It delivers enterprise-level security and reliability to protect your data and your customers, while letting you tap into the limitless potential of applications like blockchain. So whether you're the visionary behind a game-changing startup or an enterprise leader who's scaling the business to new heights, IBM Linux One gives you the power to transform ideas into innovation. IBM Linux One, your open source platform for big impact in a small footprint.
Very good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. As always, we really appreciate your time. And it's always good to kick off with a bit of a video to wake us all up. And hopefully it also gave you an opportunity to switch everything off and get ready to join us for what's a really interesting session. So this one's entitled Transforming Applications and Enterprise Data with Security. So on behalf of Fujitsu and IBM, we really appreciate you taking the time. Before we kick on with the content, what I'll do is a little bit of a tech and ops overview. It is 2022, so we all basically have a PhD in digital events at this point. But very briefly, this is all browser-based today. So if you're having any issues with the technology, the best thing to do is actually to refresh the browser, and that should all be good to go. You can also just let us know if you're having any challenges just in the chat here. And on that note, I might just pop in a quick hello. Feel free to use the chat throughout. It's great to get some feedback for the presenters by way of any comments or questions. So perhaps you can pop through and say hi, maybe let us know where you're dialing in from, get a couple of the presenters jealous perhaps. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you throughout. So as I said, this content, it's an interesting piece. There's a couple of areas there that obviously there is a lot of change in. And looking forward to sort of having a look at it from a Fujitsu and IBM perspective. To do this today, we have some really great presenters, which I'll just briefly introduce. So we've got Marcel Figueiredo, the Global Offering Management and Center of Excellence Director from Fujitsu, as well as Marcel Mitran, the CTO of Linux One and Red Hat Synergy at IBM Z. So thanks so much for joining us today, gentlemen. So what I'll do now is hand over to Marcos, and then they'll be taking you through a bit of a presentation, and then we'll all meet up together for a bit of a Q&A at the end. So on that note, over to you guys.
Thank you, Matt, for the introduction. So it is my pleasure to be with you all today here, to join Marcel to talk a little bit about what is Fujitsu Enterprise Postgres and what it can do in combination with Linux One and OpenShift. And in the process of talking about that, we want to address and talk a little bit about the pressing challenges that organizations have to face when they are engaging in transforming their applications and the enterprise data, right? So there's a lot going on in this area. And we want to just give us a little bit of what we think you can do if you are facing some of those challenges. So thank you again for joining us. I hope this will be a productive session, and feel free to interact with us on the chat. And I will just start with a little bit. So before we start talking about the technology in itself and in our solution, so I want to just give a step back and look into a few things that are not necessarily trends. I'm calling them trends here, but they're not necessarily trends. They're just the reality, the way things are today. So the first thing is, you probably heard this many, many times over the last few years. It's the reality of the awareness that everybody now have around the need for data rights, for rights around data and privacy. So there's a lot of awareness that our data needs to be protected. We need regulations actually to protect the citizens against how companies are exploiting people's data. And So much so that most of the governments around the world are pushing for regulations around data privacy, and they also now enforcing, for the most part, business to comply with multiple requirements. So it's not uncommon for a business to actually to have to deal with multiple of this regulatory and compliance requirements at the same time. And from a pure technological perspective, this is there's one pervasive way to actually address most of the underlying issues, and that underlying way is it's really around data encryption, data masking, and guaranteeing only the right people will have access to that. So that, of course, is not spelled out on some of those regulations, but behind the scenes, that's the way how you protect the digital information, right? So now that we are on the same page in terms of what's going on in terms of data security and privacy, I want to talk about a trend that you can see on the bottom of this chart, which is very interesting, at first disconnected from the privacy discussion, but you will see I will draw some parallel here, and it's a trend around the popularity of open source software. In this case, more specifically around database. The chart you see here shows that actually for the first time since 2013, we see open source solutions, open source databases being more adopted or more popular than actually commercial ones. And there are, of course, consequences with that. You might be asking, okay, what's the reason behind that trend? And I'll pick one quick type of technology, which of course is the one that it's my favorite one, but not just because of that. It's because we think it's the most robust one, and we'll get to that point later on. But I'll highlight Postgres. Hopefully at this point, you probably heard about this technology. There's a lot of awareness around Postgres, and there's a steady trend of growing adoption of Postgres technology in the database space. And on this chart, there's a lot of information there. But what I want you to take off this of this picture here is there are two levers that actually are driving organizations to consider open source. One of them is around agility, and the other one is around cost. So there's this need to innovate faster than ever before in a timely and cost-effective way to remain competitive and to keep competitive advantage. So that's one of the reasons why people are looking into, okay, so what are the options out there? And when you combine open source solutions with things like containerization, microservices, and things of that nature, you get to move those two levers in a way that you can address those challenges. So you can see on the very right-hand side, the combination of this multi-cloud, containerized applications, and databases actually deliver the greater agility through lower cost. But not all companies have acted or jumped into that bandwagon yet, just because the monolithic applications and databases, they still have a lot of value, and there's a lot that they can offer that are not being offered on the right-hand side. And a lot of that has to do with security, automation, and scalability. So we will be talking on how you can actually adopt an open source solution and protect or guarantee you actually meet the same levels of that you can actually achieve using a monolithic traditional commercial solution. And hopefully you will be able to understand that a little bit better as we move on here. And before I pass over to Marcel to really dive into the conversation and talking about more of the technology itself, you probably are asking yourself, why should I pay attention to Fujitsu and IBM in the open source space, right? That's a fair question, and I want to address the elephant in the room, no puns intended. Which is why would I pay attention to both of you guys? You were traditionally pushing commercial source software and solutions, and the reason I have a list here, of course, I'm not going to walk through that, but I want to highlight Fujitsu and IBM are founding members of the Linux Foundation, so we have embraced open source technology from the beginning, and combined, we can offer better solutions for our clients, from services and expertise on IBM side or Fujitsu side, all the way to how I can transform and adopt using this open source solutions. So it just a few highlights. So Fujitsu is working with the community in terms of Postgres for the last 20 years. And we are heavily providing back to the community. So we are active contributors in the community. And you see from Marcel, he will talk a little bit on how actually Linux One helps organizations across the globe to leverage the best of the open source with the most secure platform out there. So, of course, you can read this later and you can check what we're doing in this space and why we are actually pushing open source solutions and why we think that's a robust way to move forward. With that, I will let Marcel now jump into talking a little bit more about the Linux One technology, and then I will tie at the end with more details on FEP. Marcel, over to you.
All right, thanks, Marcos. So Linux One, what is Linux One? Well, Linux One, the idea is pretty simple in a nutshell, right? It's taking 60 years of engineering for systems at the center of the modern enterprise, at the core of the modern enterprise, right? All the engineering I know how that IBM has built as we've built systems that have grown up with the modern enterprise, taking that and merging it and bringing together with the open ecosystem, the agility, the innovation of the Linux space, right? Bringing those two things together is actually something very, very unique in the industry. And we see customers, struggling with this. They want that speed. They want the innovation. They want to capture all of that Linux goodness, but they also have these inherent qualities of service requirements in their business around, that Marcos alluded to, around security, high availability, scalability. They still have those needs. And Linux One is the system positioned to address those needs. And so what I want to do today is just walk through some of the engineering in this system to give you a sense of what we mean by that, and why we believe we have something unique. So Linux One in itself is really not just a server, it's really a cloud in a box. It's a system that can host 85 different hypervisor instances. Those instances are all better than air-gap isolated from each other. That's what EAL5 Plus means. That's a certified, FIPS level certification. You can put 2 million containers on one of these boxes and put massive amounts of compute, I/O, and memory for your workloads. And because you're running all of these workloads at very high utilization, you're getting a very efficient outcome by scaling out and scaling up within the context of a single footprint. And we have customers who are reducing their carbon footprint by up to 80%, their data center footprint by 80% by using these systems to host their workloads. And so the ability to move the resources around between these 85 hypervisors, thousands of Linux guests, all of that can be done dynamically, non-disruptively, right? That's how you get that scale up and scale out value proposition. That too is unique and gives you a true cloud experience from these systems. Now, under the covers, as you host workloads on these systems, you're going to need to see these systems, they need to be highly resilient, right? If they're at the center of your enterprise hosting the mission critical workloads that can't go down, that has to be engineered into the box. And so we do that. That's what we do with Linux One. The engineering here goes from everything in how the cores are built to how the memory is built and to how the life cycle of the actual hardware is managed. So for instance, the cores actually can detect failures and fail over to spare cores in the system automatically if a core fails. Similarly, the memory is self-healing. So we actually have never seen a system come down due to a memory failure in the decades that we've had this self-healing memory, for instance. And that comes out when you look at what iTick is saying, right? Linux One is the most resilient Linux server in the industry as a result. And you can do things like, change chips on the fly without ever bringing the system down, change I/O, change motherboards, right? All of those capabilities is how you get to that highly available system that underpins your mission critical workloads and keeps your business going, right? In and out, day in and day out. Similarly, when we look at the engineering that goes into the cores themselves, these are highly engineered, super efficient systems designed for enterprise workloads, for data serving workloads. Single thread performance, leading in the industry, 5.2 gigahertz clock system. Nothing else comes close to from a thread speed perspective. Massive amounts of cache. You're looking at 16 times more cache per thread than any other system in the industry, right? That's because you're moving big amounts of data through these systems, and you want to move them at the speed of those threads, those highly high speed threads. If the core is going really fast, but the data is not moving as fast enough, the core is going to spend a lot of time idling and not doing real work. So we need these massive caches here to keep the workload moving, keep the data moving efficiently. We also engineer into these cores tons of accelerators, tons of capabilities to accelerate workloads that matter in the enterprise. So things like pauseless garbage collection. If you're running transactional workloads based on Java, the last thing you want to see happen is, your JVM says, look, I got to take a break. I got to go clean up all this memory in the heap. And all these transactions, well, too bad. They're going to all fail and not meet your service level agreements because I got to go figure out how to clean up memory. Well, that doesn't make sense when you're running transactional workloads. You need the garbage collector to do its thing without getting in the way of transactions completing. And so we've engineered into the hardware capabilities like pauseless garbage collection to reduce the time the JVM spends pausing to do that memory management. Similarly, if you're talking about data processing workloads, those workloads tend to have a lot of highly sensitive data in them. And so we engineer massive amounts of footprint into our cores for crypto acceleration. Nobody else in the industry comes close to meeting the performance that we have from an encryption and decryption bandwidth perspective. Similarly, you're going to be doing a lot of data movement, and you're going to want to compress that data. Compressed data is faster to move, it's cheaper to store. And so we put accelerators into the cores around data compression as well as a result. And so to give you a sense of the type of speed ups that these accelerators provide, just from a database backup perspective, 27 times faster due to the fact that we provide that compression capability on chip, right? Your database can just go ahead and compress those tables way faster on this system than they could on any other system in the industry. That means your business can move faster. You can be more agile, getting the work done that needs to get done to keep the business going, keep it resilient, keep it meeting your compliance and regulatory requirements. Similarly, give you a sense on what the Java garbage collector, pauseless garbage collector does. It will reduce pause times by 92%. That's an order of magnitude reduction in pause times. That means you can get 4 times more transactions through this processor when you need to meet certain SLAs, as a result of the fact that you're not losing transactions because they're timing out because of garbage collection. So that, just to hopefully give you a sense of, this is the type of engineering we put into these cores to meet the needs of those workloads. Similarly, from an encryption perspective, we had one customer measure hashing performance at 100x faster on our system than the leading alternative system. They were buying high-end systems to try and solve this problem with a competitor. Couldn't come close. We were 100 times faster because we put that hashing accelerator into our cores and focused and made them highly efficient. And more generally, from an encryption perspective, 4 to 9x faster as well, doing typical, crypto as well. So just a system that's really designed to meet the needs of the enterprise. And then when we go sort of look at taking that security value proposition and kind of double click on it, a ton of security engineering goes into these systems as well. Again, because of where they're coming from at the core of the enterprise, there has to be a lot of focus on data security, data privacy, right? When you are the system of record that's keeping major banks up and running, that has to be engineered into these systems to make them useful and meet the needs of those enterprises. And so we've been leaders actually in the confidential computing space. We can protect data in use through trusted execution environments in our environment. We provide pervasive encryption. All that crypto bandwidth means that you can encrypt everything and not have to worry about the effect on your transactional workloads or your batch workloads. Because the encryption is so good, it's so fast, it doesn't matter. You can afford to encrypt everything and not have to worry about slowing down the workloads. There's tamper resistance built into the system as well. For instance, the hardware security module, the HSMs, are FIPS 140-2 level 4 compliant or certified. That's the highest level of certification for a hardware security module in the industry, and we are the only server in the industry that provides that level of compliance and certification for our HSMs. You cannot get a level 4 HSM anywhere else. And that's what this level 4 means. It means that it is a tamper-proof hardware security module. The security module can actually detect tampering, a change in temperature, change in magnetic field around the HSM will trigger a tamper exposure, and the HSM will automatically destroy the secrets that you're storing on it. Nobody else in the industry can do that and provide that level of security. When we talk about just pure crypto performance, as I mentioned, 9 times faster than anybody else, up to 100 times when you start to look at things like hashing. We've had 0 reported hypervisor security breaches on our hypervisor ever, right? Never had a security breach on our hypervisor. Our trusted execution environments are designed for scale. We're talking about 16 terabytes of footprint. So you can actually put entire Linux stacks inside our trusted execution environments, run them unmodified. Unlike other capabilities, other servers in this space who require that you modify applications, rewrite applications to fit into a much smaller footprint, ours just take the footprint unmodified and run it as is. And as I mentioned, all of those hypervisors, those 85 hypervisors that run on a single system, they're EL5 plus isolated. That's better than air gap isolation. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the type of engineering that goes into these systems. And again, the point of Linux One was to take all that engineering and democratize it, right? Make it available, of course, to the enterprises who want to embrace Linux, but also make it available to the startups who need these capabilities and need to be able to run their businesses and provide these qualities of service and today with that Linux ecosystem. So I'll pass it back to you, Marcos, to talk a little bit more about how Fujitsu takes advantage of these capabilities.
Awesome. Yeah. So now let's talk a little bit about why Fujitsu Enterprise Postgres. What is different on Fujitsu Enterprise Postgres? I will refer as a FEP, and I hope you will feel familiar at the end of this also to call it FEP. But Fujitsu Enterprise Postgres, it's very unique in terms of the capabilities that we provide for the enterprises. So in addition to the fact that we are fully compatible with Postgres community, we provide with that a true no vendor lock-in solution. So if you, for whatever reason, in the future don't like our solution and want to move back to the community Postgres version, you are not locked into our solution, even when you are using some of our advanced capabilities. So it is just a data movement. Of course, you're not going to be able to leverage the advanced capabilities when you move back to the community, but you have the ability to move back and forth if you feel you need to. So we have built around 4 key areas, and I see actually a question in the chat that hopefully I will answer with when I talk about those four key areas. So we take the community Postgres, of course, we validate all the code because there's a lot of questions, especially within the business, in terms of how secure is an open source solution. Right? What is the guarantee I have in terms of that nobody's putting some sort of malicious code inside of the community versions. So we do, of course, a thorough analysis before we release our own version in terms of guaranteeing the code is secure. There's nothing malicious inside of it. In addition to that, we provide a few other extra capabilities, all of them included in the base product. And they divide into 4 major categories. So security. So we have very unique capabilities around security. You have the name of the features at the bottom, but I want to highlight one which I think is key today. A lot of enterprise clients that use commercial solutions are leveraging something called TDE, so transparent data encryption, and that's not so prevalent on the open source side. So we are one of the few open source solutions that actually provide that level of capability to encrypt data on the tables, transparent to the application. So you don't need to worry about modifying your application to leverage those capabilities. So we really built from the ground up to provide rock solid security. And of course, when we start looking into, okay, now I need something that can perform, that can scale. So we have a few additional features that I can leverage the power of Postgres and actually can address all the types of workloads from the perspective. If you have mixed type of workloads, so OLAP and OLTP in the same against the same database, you can leverage one of our features, for example, in-memory columnar indexing to address those without having performance impact. So we really designed to allow you to keep your business up and running with the highest performance possible. Then we got into resiliency. Of course, somebody looking into an enterprise version of an open source do need some resiliency. So we have DR capabilities, mirroring of the controllers, all of those things that you would expect from an enterprise solution. And finally, around automation, a lot of our capabilities are present on the monolithic version. So if you want to put this in a standard server, bare metal, you have those features. And you have the same features when you go actually into a containerized version. And I'll show a little bit on the OpenShift side, for example, you have the same capabilities across the board, independent on where you're deploying this or how you're deploying it. So on the automation, it's really about the auto scale, the monitoring capabilities that we bring to the table. So those are four key areas. Of course, we have a lot of other features that we could spend hours talking about, but I want to give you just a sense of the key points that make our solution different and differentiated versus what you have in the market, and why those can actually deliver on the needs you might have when you are looking into transforming your enterprise data. When you combine all of those, and yeah, there's a lot of information on this wheel, and hopefully you can actually digest this later. But when you combine all of those functionalities with a platform like Linux One, basically you are augmenting all those capabilities to a whole new level. So the things that Marcel mentioned, like FIPS certification level 4, now you have your database sitting in a platform that you can rely and have the stamp that you are using a solution that has the highest level of certification in terms of FIPS. We do have a tight integration with the Linux One crypto cards, for example, which is also very unique. No other solution, no other database open source solution is doing that. So we actually leverage all the engineering investment that IBM has done in terms of hardware, and we leverage that to the maximum in our software. So we are partnering very close to Linux One in terms of providing that extra level, the state of the art in terms of what's possible around security and compliance. Another few things in terms of speed. When you get our solution and put that on the Linux One box, you get, of course, a lot more performance, a lot more scale up capabilities. So we are talking about at least 2.3 times faster in terms of the transactions you can drive using our solution on this system. And of course, availability. So combining our availability, DR capabilities with what a Linux One can provide, and maybe combining that even with some GDPS solutions that IBM provide, you get to the 5 nines of availability, which again are the kinds of things you would expect on an enterprise solution. So you can do that using open source and the right platform, which in this case is Linux One. We do have a red hat on the corner to really highlight this is also the right platform for DevSecOps. So there's a lot that we talk a lot about DevOps, but DevSecOps is actually gaining more traction as well. And when you look at the right place and the right platform to do to be the platform of choice for your DevSecOps deployments, here you have it. So we are actually part of the OpenShift platform, and combined with Linux One, we deliver a unique solution for the DevSecOps. So combined with all of that, of course, you would expect support. We have a 24/7 support with guaranteed code patches and migration services and etc. that you can rely on IBM and Fujitsu to deliver in case you need. And this is just a snip to show what we can deliver. So I'll have a quick demo. Hopefully this will work. I mean, we try to kind of record to not get into the technology issues of crashing, but I will show quickly how easy and how simple it is to have this running, for example, on an OCP, on OpenShift cluster, how simple it is to deploy FEP, and you can do that in a matter of minutes. So I will, so Matt or Simon, if you can play the video for me, that would appreciate it. Yeah. All right. So the video is accelerated a little bit, so I, of course, will not drive it, all the details on it. But no matter where you want to deploy, you have the portability, the security across the board, and you can have it up and running in a matter of minutes. Very simple, intuitive to find. So if you type FEP, you see us in the catalog. And with just the click, you can pretty much just fill up a few of the basic informations, and you're going to have your pods running. Of course, it's not this fast because it's just accelerated, but you can see we were showing two pods were deployed after we created the install. So this is another way just where you can actually put some extra informations, and you see you can do that using a YAML file if you don't want to use the GUI. So you have flexibility. Not only, hey, I don't want to use a GUI. I don't think that's nice. I just want to create my YAML files. You can do that. You can also do that through the command line. So which is very useful. Again, back to the DevSecOps or DevOps environments. Very useful if you want to do that. Deploy your databases on pods using that integration. We have. So in here we are we're looking at a cluster where we're gonna show you we have a master and two other nodes being replicated. So if you lose your master, you have the guarantee that you're not losing data. So you have a synchronous sync between them. And hopefully we'll start showing it quick. So now we are showing on the command line, so you can see we have a master node running. The secondary one is starting, and it shows, of course, the age, and that's useful when you are deploying a DR solution. So here we go. So the details. So you have the replica. You have two replicas. So if you lose the first one, you can have the other ones. And we have three very, very unique features. We mentioned a couple of them, but again, to highlight and tie back to why it matters for regulatory and compliance situations. TDE, data masking, and VCI, or vertical cluster indexing. I'm just going to highlight the TDE portion here. But basically, that is the capability where you can encrypt the whole data that you have in a table without having to change anything in your application. And you can do that on the fly here. In this case, it moved very fast, but this table got encrypted. And you can see the cluster still running. So you encrypted that table, cluster still running. You could decrypt that data. And if you need to move this out of our solution, you just decrypt that data and move to a Postgres community, for example, solution. So very robust set of functions to really meet the requirements when you need a solution that needs to deliver on security and compliance and performance. So there's a lot more that we could talk about, but we only have this at 30 minutes. So I apologize for speeding up a little bit. But you can see once you get this presentation, you will be able to see there's a link with all the functions, features that you can exploit on if you're using OCP. And there's a video with more details and the whole demo on this link there. So hopefully I was able to give you a glimpse of what can be done and how simple it is to have this up and running. So it's not, you don't need 10 engineers to get this up and running, 10 DBAs to discuss how to deploy this. Is really just clicking on installing, and you have a pod up and running in a few seconds. And of course, all of that can be done on the Z platform, which is fully compatible with OCP. So with that, there is a lot of resources. So this partnership with IBM, it's a long partnership. So we're doing this for a while now. There's a lot of the links where you can visit and see how we exploit the security, the crypto cards that Marcel talked about, and red books, and you name it, all kinds of resources. We always open to receive inquiries in our website. You can reach out to me or Marcel on LinkedIn. And we're going to open for questions now. And I see one. I'm not sure, Matt, if you want to.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Marcos and Marcel, for taking us through that. It was some of the data points around sort of the speed and reliability, and then how open source is being integrated in such an innovative way. It's fantastic. We do have a question, and for everybody online, feel free to pop through some questions, and we can finish up with a bit of a chat. This one comes from Mohsen. Thanks so much for that, Mohsen. What's the best way to manage questions from the business with regards to security and open source? Marcos, that's a bit of a challenge, I guess, particularly for people that might be sort of looking at technology from the outside in.
Yes, absolutely. And if you start looking online, you see that's one of the main issues organizations have in terms of how do we actually get our projects that were incubated in open source, how we make that core into our enterprise platforms, right? And a lot has to do with having an enterprise option for that open source, right? So when you bring an enterprise, you have capabilities like support, which you would not have in a traditional community version. You have a company backing that up, so that reduces the risk for the business in terms of having somebody to call to help you out if you have issues. And of course, not only from the pure support perspective, you need guarantees that you can scale. As your business grows, you need something that can scale. You need something that can guarantee protection of your data. So the way to do it, it's really to show that open source has evolved, and there's a lot of a company supporting open source, and that's the less risky way to adopt those things and make them viable within the organizations.
Yeah, for sure. Marcel, did you have anything to add on that around sort of, I guess, the perception of security of open source? I think Marcos puts it well in that it has come a long way.
Well, I think that's where vendors like Fujitsu play a really critical role, right? They act as the sort of middleman that hardens and secures the open source technology to make it consumable by the enterprise. So that's key to the role that Fujitsu plays here with respect to this offering. So yeah, I think it makes complete sense, and that's why Fujitsu does what they do.
Oh, brilliant. And Marcos, when you're looking at sort of open source, like what do you sort of see as the key drivers for this sort of continued expansion of open source in the enterprise? Because it really has sort of, been expedited over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think it ties back to my third or fourth slide, which is really cost and the agility, right? Agility from the perspective, your developers, they don't need to go on the line of business and ask for approval to buy a license to start using to do a small project, to incubate some solution internally, right? So they can just go download, start using without worrying too much about risk. And then there's the cost component, right? So commercial databases, they became so expensive and so hard to deal in terms of licensing. The terms are so complex that that's pushing organizations a way of adopting them. It's not that they are bad solutions. It's just like the business practice around it that driving people to look into the community, open source community for options. So the combination of those two things are key drivers, right? And the big question is how do you give the next step, right? Once you adopt it, once you kind of have visibility, you have a lower cost, how do you make them enterprise? And that's where we play in with Fujitsu Enterprise Postgres.
Yeah, great.
I do think there's an added value in that it's open standard, right? So when you adopt the technology like Postgres, it's the same Postgres no matter which vendor you ultimately go to. I'm assuming the vendor sticks to the standard, so you know what you're getting, and so there's a certain level of security knowing that there's no vendor lock-in at the end of the day. You really are buying the product for its value and differentiation, not because somebody bought into it at some point in the history of the organization and now it's really hard to get off of it, right? So that is, I think, a really key thing about open source is that open source is essentially not just about code, it's about open standards and making sure everybody knows that they're playing by the same rules from a standardization of the technology perspective.
Yeah, great. And I guess for yourself, Marcel, to take that a bit further forward, when you're looking at sort of innovation and modernization, where do you see the role of open source there? Like we've already talked about sort of how you can sort of, effectively get things going, relatively cheaply. Where are you seeing open source in terms of driving innovation?
Well, I think as any organization that's looking at replatforming, right, to modernize, everybody knows replatforming is an incredibly expensive effort. And so the last thing you want to do is replatform to then find out that you're locked in, right? You want to go to a platform that gives you the ability to make choice and to change your mind. And that's where open source is beautiful, because you can choose one vendor who supports that open source community, and if things are not working out for whatever reason, you can choose to go elsewhere, right? So again, it comes down to avoiding lock-in, giving clients choice, and giving them freedom of action as they make investments that are going to have an impact on their business for potentially decades to come.
Yeah, great. Gentlemen, we've actually hit time, so a big thank you for taking us through the content. And it was great to have a look at, I guess, open source in a bit more detail, just through a general discussion. And I'd encourage everybody online to continue that general discussion going with both IBM and Fujitsu around this space. Guys, any final comments before we close up?
No, thank you very much for all of you that made time to attend. Hopefully, if you're watching this on a replay, feel free also to try to follow up with any one of us. Also, thank you, Marcel, for helping us on this partnership. And that's it. Thank you very much, all.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Marcos and the team at Fujitsu. It's been an amazing partnership, and we've got something amazing here. So let's keep pushing.